Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. Well, for some time I've been hearing stories about how our intelligence community remains, despite its protests, very interested in the subject of psionics, psychics, and the phenomena that I think a lot of debunkers dismiss pejoratively as a load of piffle and nonsense. Well, today I'm very honoured to be able to welcome to Reality Check a woman who is an extraordinarily accomplished woman. Sarah Gamm worked on the UAP Task Force officially for about a year with the Pentagon in the Department of Defense, and then unofficially for a lot longer before AARO took over. And I've seen her speaking elsewhere, and I think her story is fascinating. I really admire her willingness to engage candidly about the fact that she believes she has certain gifts, psychic abilities, mediumship abilities, and yet at the same time, she's an accomplished scientist, trained scientist, and intelligence analyst working in different times at very high levels of the US intelligence community. So we're talking again this week through our sponsor about the horrors of what happens to your body when you eat the ultra-processed food that passes for grub in America. And it turns out the key to losing weight and keeping it off is not in carbs or fat or even in probiotic rich foods. No, the end game of having a healthy weight as well as more energy and a long, healthy life comes down to a specific switch you can flip in your body to flush out unnecessary calories. Dr. Stephen Gundry is calling this caloric bypass. And by activating this specific process in your body, he has seen thousands, yes, thousands of people dramatically improve their health, even at age 50 and beyond. This includes losing weight, getting tons more energy, and returning to the good health they had in their youth once they simply addressed this one key to better health. And not only is this associated with improved digestion, strong feeling joints and muscles, smoother skin and healthier lives, it could also be the key to a healthier life. Dr. Stephen Gundry's lost 70 pounds himself using his research and has kept the weight off for over 20 years and counting. His digestive issues are gone, his health is fantastic, and he feels younger and healthier today than he did in his 40s. His video has been watched by over 20 million people to date, and you can watch and learn more about it at thehealthyfat.com/Ross. I'll say that again, thehealthyfat.com/Ross. It's linked at the bottom of this video, but he'll teach you exactly how he's kept his weight off for free at thehealthyfat.com/Ross. And you can click in the description below. It's a privilege to have her with us here today. And Sarah, I'd like to welcome you to Reality Check.
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and I appreciate that intro.
So tell me this, Sarah, you worked on the UAP Task Force. What years were you there?
I started officially in 2019 through, I forget, somewhere later in 2020, whenever I left NGA and National Geospatial Intelligence Agency and went to ODNI, Office of Director of National Intelligence. So that was my official stint on it, and then the unofficial stint was I kept on supporting from behind the door a little bit.
Now, you'll know that I interviewed Dave Grush, of course, last year, and of course he came from the NGIA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. I don't suppose you guys shared a desk or were in the same coffee room by any chance, were you? Did you know him
No,
there?
no, we weren't even in the same time zone. I know he also supported from NRO perspective, and some of the NRO colleagues knew him, but we were not in the same time zone, so we never got to share coffee or meet.
So you'd never even heard about each other, and even though you were working on the UAPTF at the time.
I did not know him. Well, I was supporting the task force from a very small niche, from a small corner from NGA. So we kind of were kept in our own bucket and didn't really participate in. He sounds like he participated in a lot broader perspective, and I was very Yeah, very fine-tuned perspective from imagery aspect.
Now, I'm sure you're tied up, like most people, with ridiculously long, top secret SCI compartmented clearances that restrict you from talking about much relating to your job, and we will respect that. We're not inviting you to discuss things that are national security sensitive. But can you give us an idea, what did the UAPTF do? Like, what was the role of the UAPTF? Because I think for a lot of us, it comes as a huge surprise to know that even while the public debate was going on about whether or not UAPs were being taken seriously, all this time there was a unit inside the Pentagon, even before AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, that was indeed investigating UFOs, UAPs.
Yeah, my perspective of the task force was either trying to prove something was unidentified, and unidentified aerial phenomenon or anomalous phenomenon, whichever term you want to use. That didn't mean it was non-human intelligence. It just meant we couldn't identify it. So that's what our definition was. And so we proved or disproved. It was a very collaborative effort. It was pretty amazing for how many different agencies and people, at least from NGA perspective, no one was really turned away who wanted to support it. It was really diverse and um, kind of like open arms type thing of collaboration. So yeah, we all worked together to try to prove or disprove data that came in.
Let's skirt around your TSSCI clearances and see how close we can get to get you to pry out some
All right.
dark secrets. So,
Definitely no promises. I don't want to go to jail tonight or any time in the near future.
did you see videos that the public hasn't seen yet that made you realize just how real the phenomenon is?
Oh, absolutely. This question's actually getting easier and easier to answer. The first time I answered it, I paused quite a long time, and now it's getting easier because I know the stigma, and people want to hear this, and these words help. So yes, definitely, there's a lot more out there, and some of it, unfortunately classified that can't be released to the public. But no doubt in my mind that we're not alone.
So, when you say we're not alone, you believe that Earth is being visited, or at least there are non human intelligences engaging with this planet.
Yes, absolutely. That
Wow.
is what I'm saying.
Can you tell us what the smoking gun was? What was the aha moment for you when you realized having access and being privy to this information within the constraints of what you're allowed to tell us? What was that moment like? What happened? What did you see and how did it move you?
Yeah, I think it was a buildup of multiple things. So one of the first videos where a handful of us really didn't know what it was, and we were talking to other intelligence community agencies and people with the clearance, right? Um, it was at first like I don't know, because my science brain is very active and skeptic. My also, but my science brain knows we're not alone because I'm an astrophysicist as well. So how could we be the only people in infinite amount of space? It just makes no sense. So I was definitely a skeptic. The first couple of things that I saw, think like discounted it as, that was just a couple of pixels. It was blurry. And then slowly over time, more and more things accumulated. And then there was, just a couple of incidences where some videos were a little bit clearer or some images were a little bit clearer than others, and it's just your breath kind of stopped. Like that's there's no way that could have been a balloon or parallax, because parallax is of course very prevalent in a lot of the cases. Yeah.
So tell me this. One of the excuses or reasons that's often given for why this kind of video data cannot be released is because to reveal it would reveal sources and methods. Now, is that a legitimate reason for excluding all of the imagery you saw? I can imagine there might be some satellites, for example, and we don't want the potential adversaries to know just how clever we are with those satellites. I talk to people here in Australia who shock me with how clear the satellite imagery is that comes down through Pine Gap all the way back to the US. But do you think that it's legitimate that all of the imagery has been withheld, or do you think that there is a public interest in seeing perhaps at least some, if not all, of that imagery?
Yeah, very good question. I will say I don't want to give a percentage, but I'll say a good portion of what I saw I don't think should be released because it is protecting sensitive and maybe, people on the ground um but yeah, I don't see why some of, what we were able to observe, even the ones that were proven to be balloons or something, to give examples of what we've been looking at, that this is science. We're not just saying every video that comes across our path, including just stuff that's posted on YouTube, right? So we're looking at all the data, not just classified. And to give examples of parallax or yeah, balloons or bird migration, I've learned about birds during this time, or fishing boat formations and all kinds of stuff that you might not really think, but you end up learning. You learn so much more than what you think just going down these rabbit holes. Um, yeah, so I could see some of them definitely being declassified. I am by far in no position to be an authority or anything like that, so I'm just going to stay hopeful that one day, maybe my words speaking right now might help nudge somebody to be able to disclose some stuff.
What do you think? And I'm not trying to get you into trouble, so you are welcome to deflect this question if you want to.
I
But
appreciate that.
what do you think of the explanation that has been offered by the Pentagon in recent times that there is no evidence at all of extraterrestrial visitation to this planet?
um, I don't know what they looked at to say that. I don't understand why they would, when there's a lot of us saying that we've seen otherwise. And uh, yeah, it kind of hurts because a lot of us worked really hard on some data and debunking or proving or, whatever. It was a lot of hard work that went into some of the videos that I saw. And for them to come out saying that right now, it hits you a little hard.
One of the things you've used a couple of times is the term parallax. Now, I know what parallax is, and I'll try and explain it, but if you could correct me, I'm sure I'm going to screw it up. As I understand it, parallax is describing the phenomenon where an object looks further away from the camera than it really is, and as a result of that, it's basically moving far faster to the viewer looking at the image than it really is. And so you get this false image of an object moving super, super fast when in fact it's actually moving quite slowly because it's closer to the camera than we realize. Is that a fair description?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I would the only thing I would add on from just trying to give I'm a visual person. So if you're looking out, like if you're a pilot in an airplane looking out over the horizon, it's really hard to judge distance. So if you're looking at a drone video and something's flying by, maybe the drone video also is panning across the scene, so that will make the object look faster as well, or maybe it might look stagnant. So it's difficult to get direction and velocity due to parallax. But yeah, you did a great job.
So, Chris Mellon, who's a former very, very senior defence official, has candidly spoken about his frustration that the Pentagon's not being open about even what it's seeing in outer space. Now, are you able to tell me, did any of the imagery that you saw in your time, come from space-based satellites or objects?
Yes. Yeah, there were some that were, from space-based satellites looking down.
And were they clearer? Well, I mean, I'm told that a lot of the more clear imagery and high resolution imagery has been shot from satellites and or the space station and or the space shuttle in its time?
I've yes, I've seen some.
Yeah. And similarly, one of the things that has been pointed to me is I'm told that one of the videos that really set off people at the UAP Task Force was an object that appeared to be operating transmedium, moving in and out of the water. Is that, are you able to speak with any reference to that? Was there an object that you saw on video that was alarmingly clear coming in and out of water?
I have seen data that shows that. I can't get into much detail about it. But some of the legacy videos that have that, the public sees, I never spent time really diving into them because people already did that. Taxpayer dollars have already gone into that. So I have seen other videos that are of what you just described.
So Lou Elizondo has at different times acknowledged that he has seen videos in the public domain that are still the subject of speculation as to whether or not they're authentic, which are, he believes, genuine videos because he saw them during his time when he was operating in a classified role. Have you had that experience yourself? Are there videos that you've seen that you believe are genuine that are still being debated in the public arena?
Yeah, I actually appreciate that question a lot. There are some things that have been leaked, and I want to say what has been unfortunately leaked, which is what we call an unauthorized disclosure, isn't the whole picture. So some things that have been in media uh, is it 5% of what it is, and I can't talk about more of what it truly was, but I will say I hope people stop leaking because that's not helping us because it's not the actual story.
Actually, this is really interesting because I respect and actually admire why you're saying that, and I think I understand why. I'm privy to some information. You know, there is a risk, isn't there? And I don't think people understand this enough that we might compromise technologies, capabilities that aren't otherwise known about by potential adversaries. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. And it's not this just that. It's we've looked at some of these things already and have, different opinions than what was provided to the media from the person who leaked the data. So that's why I'm saying, other than it being like a unauthorized disclosure and an issue from that perspective, it is not the whole story and it's not always accurate. So it's actually hurting us versus helping us.
Yeah. So let's talk about you, Sarah. I mean, I'm fascinated and I admire your courage in being prepared to talk about it because you actually copped a serve from a certain person who shall be unnamed after you came public and talked about your mediumship role, the fact that you have alleged psychic abilities and that you use those psychic abilities as a separate day job, a separate job from your day job. What can you tell me about how early you realised you had those alleged gifts?
Childhood. I had encounters with a loved one that had passed over, that crossed over, geez. And probably middle school, I started having encounters with spirit. And I didn't start having more psychic abilities until after I had a near-death experience in 2012. And
Now,
after that, more things started happening. But yeah, so kind of for a while, but I didn't really start learning yeah, I don't even know how to approach it. Learning this journey, taking classes and training until about probably 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, I forget now.
now that's fascinating to me because I've spoken to a lot of people who are combat veterans, people who've been in very near-death experiences when there are people shooting at them, trying to kill them, and they describe how often they have an encounter or an engagement with the phenomenon for the very first time that literally scares the bejabbers out of them. It's often not friendly. In your case, it seems to have been quite friendly, hasn't it? Can you tell me what happened? I mean, I don't want to distress you because I know it was a horrific period in your life, but How was it that you came, a beautiful young woman like yourself, how was it that you came close to death, for heaven's sake? What happened?
I had a routine sinus surgery. I had a bad deviated septum and was getting a septoplasty done, and surgery went well. Recovery room did not. I first initially woke up and asked to go back to sleep. And when I went back to sleep, I didn't wake up again. I heard the nurse say, "Oh my God, she's not breathing." And I was like, "Who's not breathing? That sucks. I pray that they're okay." And it was me. And next thing I know, I'm not on Earth anymore, and with my family and loved ones. And yeah, it was very unexpected. And I don't even know how soon after that was when I started having psychic things, probably within a couple years.
So I can't let this go by. You've actually died.
Yeah, yeah.
What's it like?
I'm alive because of an epinephrine shot, actually, and because God kicked me out of heaven. So,
So,
what's it like? It is the most, if you can imagine love and peace and those things completely surrounding you in a cloud or in a bubble. And it's that feeling that you're picturing right now, except exponentially more. It's incredible, and having my family there, I'm trying not to tear up. It's the best feeling ever. I was home, and my family was there to greet me, and then I heard a voice say, "You gotta go back," and I was like, "Go back where? This is great. I'm good. That place sucked." And I lost that argument. My family teamed up with the voice, with God, source, whoever you want to say it is, and my family teamed up, and I lost that argument. They came back.
and so you're saying that as a result of that experience, something seems to have enhanced abilities that I think you believe you already had.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems like, I don't know if something maybe got turned on or what, but stuff, and it felt like it was always there, but it was a little boost, a battery pack boost, and it started happening.
So, a lot of the people I've spoken to who are combat veterans, people who've been involved in killing themselves and basically people trying to kill them, they often have really frightening experiences. You know, they've had the kind of hitchhiker phenomenon where apparently malevolent, anomalous phenomena appears to be engaging with them. That's quite threatening. Is that what happened to you?
I didn't have any, well, I don't know. I don't know how far you want to get in down this rabbit hole, but I've
I
definitely
want to
had
go
some
all the
malevolent
way.
things.
I'm very
Yeah,
interested.
all
Very
right.
interested.
Everybody, buckle up. I have definitely had some malevolent things happen to me for sure. I have encountered so many different things from, I call it earthbound spirits, which are ghosts. Like, so if you see ghost hunting shows, it's typically earthbound spirits they haven't crossed over to the other side. Even different alien races during some of my sessions, house clearings, or house clearing is when a medium, a Reiki master could even go in. It doesn't have to be a medium, but you kind of clear out somebody's house for them if they feel like there's a spirit there, or maybe some really bad energy. So you go in and kind of clear it out and then bless it afterwards. So I've encountered some malevolent things during pretty much all of the types of spiritual work that I do. But I've encountered a lot of good and a lot of love. So I don't want to negate and say everything's bad, but um, yeah, I don't know. Want to get into specifics, but there's also something that's called residual energy. So that's kind of like an imprint. So think of physics. You know, everything is energy. Everything is, you can't. What is the first law of thermodynamics? You can't create or destroy energy, and or a part of the first law. Um, so everything's energy, even the other side. So a ghost or a soul that was here, that was alive, when it goes the other side, it's in another dimension where there's still energy, there's still electromagnetic field. And so that if there's a traumatic experience that happened in a place, war, or maybe a murder or a flood, and flash flood comes through, so there's trauma, there's an imprint that happened in the energy field. And this residual energy is like a replay. It's a movie reel, like a just short reel that's on a loop. And so sometimes the energy doesn't know that you're there, but when like a person sensitive to it, when I walk through it, I'll absorb something. And so I've absorbed some very negative things as well before.
So, when you were a child, before you had this near death experience, had you experienced any kind of anomalous phenomena?
When I was a kid, I thought I did, but now I know I was likely watching satellites fly over. Um, I never saw anything looking up in the sky because I first fell in love with the stars when I was in third grade. One of my brothers got a satellite for Christmas, and we took it out and we looked at the moon. I annoyed everybody with a million questions that no one had answers to, and it was love at first sight. So I've been looking up for a very long time, and I grew up in rural Missouri on a farm. So we had clear skies all the nights that I wanted that didn't have clouds. And I never saw any object in the sky until last year. So I was in North Carolina with my family and some friends and some strangers at Brown Mountain on Linville Gorge in North Carolina.
And Brown, but just for the
And
sake of our viewers who may not know Brown Mountain, it's quite a famous location for looking at anomalous lights, isn't it?
Mhm. Yes, Brown Mountain Lights. So that was the whole purpose. We were going UFO hunting, and the group of us, I think there was maybe 10 or 8 to 10 of us, I forget. And then there were some other strangers on the overlook. So it was not a hike or anything. So there's concrete path and stuff like that. So it's not you're not out completely in the wilderness, but it's a beautiful, beautiful view if anybody ever gets a chance to go there. And one of the guys and I that I had just met, we were talking with a woman and we were facing, like I'm facing you right now. And so we were looking up and the light appeared. And I kind of took my breath away and I was like, that's an airplane. That's for sure an airplane. And discounted it and it went away. And then it came back and it was just a little bit higher than where it was before. And it kind of did a little bit of movement and just disappeared. And it happened so quickly. I couldn't even get my phone out. Like, so I totally understand when people are like, I didn't get a video because the video probably wouldn't have showed up anyway because it was, midnight or something. Um, yeah, it was pretty crazy. And I was looked at the dude and I'm like, did you just? And he had this beautiful soft voice and he was like, yeah, I don't want to ruin your experience. And I'm like, but you could ruin it. Was that what we saw? Like, go ahead and ruin it. I want to know.
And so you're convinced it was something really anomalous.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was really cool. And no one else saw it because all the other group, they were in a different spot and they were looking at different directions. So we were we were the only two that saw it.
Now, do you want to talk about the more recent anomalous objects that you've seen? I think even in the privacy of your own home.
Yeah. I haven't told a ton of people this. Um, this was actually probably, I would say, I'm trying to think of what time frame it was. I know it was at least last summer or maybe before that. I so I do have vivid dreams and lucid dreams. And so sometimes I know dreams are happening and I'll let them play out or I'll control them or something like that. And so at one point, I don't know what time of the night it was because I never bothered to look at the clock. But something woke me up because it was pacing in my bedroom. And as a medium, that happens. That is that is not I'm going to call it a rare occurrence now because I know how to protect myself and I know how to protect my house. But it happens and so I immediately thought, oh, this is a spirit because sometimes I'll see these things in between, like when you're starting to wake up and coming out of REM, I'll see them then. So when I actually open my eyes, they won't be there and then I kicked them out of my house. So at this instance, I actually sat up in bed and it was still there. And I'm like, I'm still sleeping. And it was pacing in my house. And
What did you see? Tell me what you saw.
um, it looked like it was probably 6.5, maybe to 7 feet tall.
Moses.
and it was dark. So it was hard to depict exactly what color it was, but it was looked like it was like a bluish purple skin. There was no hair on top of its head, and it had some ridges on its side. There were no ears, so it was really flat, and the nose kind of looked like a little bit more like Voldemort, but maybe a little bit more bump than Voldemort. And it had like I'll call it like a Star Trek type uniform on, very like straight, plain, very clean. I couldn't tell what color it was because it was dark, but so it was a darker color, and it had this sword. It looked like it was made of very beautiful crystals. Like not crystals, it wasn't plural, it was like one object. It looked like some from a sci-fi movie, but it was like glowing and it was like kind of changing. Um,
Sorry, where was this? Sorry, I didn't pick up where that was. What was this crystal?
yeah, it was in my bedroom. So the he was holding it.
Oh, so he was holding what, a rod
He was
or a?
holding the sword at his side. So what do I have around here? Here's my phone. So he was holding like if this is the handle, he was holding it downward, like not in a threatening, like not attacking, not in a threatening manner. And he was pacing, not quite at the foot of my bed, but a little bit past it. And so I still was like, my is this real? Like, this is totally real. And so I look down, and Krypton, my cat, he is my little protector, and he was just sitting there watching it. So I've seen Krypton um, fight malevolent things for me, spiritual wise, and I have seen him growl and fight in the air, and he's also seen I have a best friend that passed away, and so he visits, and so Krypton, like I've seen him react to good and bad energy, and he was just sitting there watching it just like I was. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I'm not getting bad feeling any either. So I started asking her questions. I'm like, can I help you? Do you need some water? Do you need a pillow? Do you need a blanket? Like, are you cold? I could turn up the air. I gotta walk by you though to get to the thermostat. So I'm asking all of these ridiculous questions just to try to get it to engage with me. And it was like a guard at the London Palace was like face forward on a mission, and I just kept feeling like it was protecting me. At one point there was kind of a glow, and it looked like a portal. It was like a very, very light pinkish glow that appeared, and he stopped, or it stopped, I shouldn't say he. It stopped, looked in the, like, the portal thing, and it lasted for not even 2 seconds, and it went away, and he kept on pacing. Oh, I got goosebumps. Um, and I was like, "Okay, so now do you need water? Should I be worried?" And again, didn't do anything, just kept on pacing. And I'm like, and so Krypton at that point laid down to go back to sleep. Okay, if you're okay with this, I'm gonna be okay with this. And so I went back to sleep.
You're kidding. So come on, Sarah. I mean, I've got to say, if I had a blue alien humanoid in my bedroom, I'd be yelling at it, saying, "Get the hell out of here!" I mean, I mean, I'd be
Well, the life
terrified.
of a medium, though, like some of these things aren't that, there's things that happen as a medium that a door might slam and you're like, okay, who wants my attention and not right now.
So, what do you think was the purpose? If this actually happened, what do you think was the purpose of that visit? I'm intrigued also that the being
Yeah.
was blue.
I think it was protecting me. I had already been I'm going to be in James Fox's film that is coming out hopefully soon. And I had already been filmed and was dealing with some, I don't know, some confusing stuff at work relating to career choices and leaving the UAP field. And so I think it was just to show me that I'm protected from the other side, that no matter what choice I make, they're there for me. I have encountered different alien races in some meditations and in some of my healing work, so to me, it was just another layer of I got support.
So, obviously, a lot, I suspect most of our viewers are sitting watching this going, "Oh my God, this is a member of the
Mhm.
UAP task force who's actually talked to an alien, somebody who has engaged with a non-human being and believes passionately that they exist. In fact, you're more than belief. You, I suspect, would say you know they're real because you've seen it
Yeah,
directly yourself.
yeah, absolutely.
So just explain to me, I mean, you're a scientist, you're an astrophysicist by training, you're a trained intelligence analyst. You're not an idiot. You're trusted with top secret SCI compartmentalized material. Your government values you. Were they ever at all, when they became aware of your mediumship role, your psychic abilities, were they ever at all discouraging you? Was there any effort to try and discourage you from being open? How does it feel in your office environment to speak candidly about the fact that you believe that you have these gifts?
Mhm. What's amazing to say is no one cares. I was terrified, petrified to let people know what I'm trying to have a business. I don't know what I'm doing, and I have no idea what I'm doing with a website either. So when I first created my LLC, my name was out there. And so I eventually called it, I outed myself on Facebook and to all my friends. Most of my friends I've known my whole life. It was no surprise to anybody. Everything made sense, but work doesn't care. My friends that I had on Facebook at the time that were coworkers, they were like they would come to work like, "Oh my gosh, you could do this. You have to tell me stories." And like everybody was actually really excited and asked me questions. And it's never come up of don't do this or like you can't have this sap read on anymore. It's never it I was terrified and I'm so proud to say that it doesn't matter.
One of the things that always intrigued me, and I remember reading slide 9 at the very beginning of my research when I was first looking at the UAP issue, and I became aware of this document that had been prepared by people inside the Pentagon who were briefing, I think, Thomas Modley, who was at the time an Undersecretary for Defense, on the phenomenon. And they were talking about how the phenomenon has the capability to psychically engage with human beings. And it struck me that one of the most recurring messages that I get from the many, many people that I speak to as I investigate and research this phenomenon is that there is an intrinsic connection between the phenomenon, what you and I might call flying saucers, flying discs, orbs, anomalous phenomena, and human consciousness and possibly human psychic abilities. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Most of my communication that I have with spirit, when I say spirit, it's with that is a bucket of all the things of the other side. When I communicate with them, it's usually telepathically or it's through images. Let's say a loved one is trying to talk I'm sitting with a client right now and I'll get an image of a sunflower. So it's like puzzle pieces. So everything does come in telepathically. So when I've heard stories of NHI and maybe even people speaking through the aircraft, like they're looking, observing at the aircraft and they get messages there, it totally didn't surprise me. And in dimensions that they operate in, you know, they understand physics and science way more than we do. Earth is pretty young compared to the age of the universe. So they're way more advanced. So it makes sense that they understand different levels, different dimensions, and can talk in different ways with us.
So, Sarah, explain this to me. The thing I wrestle with as a journalist, I'm an open person, a transparent person. I don't understand why, if there is a non human intelligence, why doesn't it land on the White House lawn? Why doesn't it show itself more overtly to
Well,
us?
wasn't there an occurrence decades ago at the White House? I don't know. I think they know that maybe we're not ready. We'll probably, you know, we have too many movies saying if they do that, we're going to go to war and you know, I don't know.
Do you, do, you, do, you,
I
do you have any evidence from your time in the Pentagon that there might be some kind of non-intervention order, a prime directive, as Star Trek referred to it?
Um, I don't think so. I mean, I am at the Pentagon now, but not for UAP stuff. No, I don't know that answer.
I mean, I can only speculate, but I mean, I guess I'm hoping, somebody like you, if I had the clearances that you've got, and I went into the Pentagon, I think we've all got this illusion, and I know it's completely deluded. I think we've all got this delusion that you can go into somewhere like the Pentagon, and whatever dark secrets there are, you can pry them out. Give us the reality, Sarah. Do you think you know? Do you think
No,
you know everything that's going on inside the Pentagon and inside the
no.
intelligence?
I don't want to know. I don't know. What I have learned through this journey, ignorance is bliss, and there are some things that I don't need to know. I'm good with that. It's such a big building. I tell my mom and dad that it's like a city itself. There's a cleaners in there. There's all kinds of different restaurants. There's a CVS and or a pharmacy for those not in the US. They don't know what CVS is. Um, it's a city. It's huge, and I purposely once in a while will just go walk and get lost just to try to find my way back to my office because it's so big and I'm still learning how to navigate. And I've been there, I don't even know, 5 or 6 months now.
So, give me your best guess. Give me your analysis based on your intuitive understanding that comes from your psychic abilities, but also from your insights that you've gained on the job. Explain what it is, the anomalous phenomenon that we're investigating. What is it? Is it alien? Is it ETs from another planet? Is it interdimensional? Is it God?
Um, Almost all the above. I, it's a good question. Um, My spiritual side is saying God is in all of us. And my spiritual side also says we are all technically parts of being aliens because we're made of the stars. So what you learned in astronomy 101 is we're star stuff and we're all made of stars. What are they doing? I've joked with people over the years that I feel like Earth is a little bit of a zoo, and they just come check on us to see, oh, go over a nuclear site. Did they explode themselves yet? And then pop in and out, go, they ocean's vast, so they're able to go maybe hide a little bit in the ocean when we are able to see them, like the few videos that we have. Um, I Oh man, I don't know how crazy you want this to get, but spiritual side of things, I have heard lots of theories, and one I do believe is Earth is young and we're kind of an experiment. So, some of the benevolent beings want to come here to make sure that we're okay, and maybe the bad guys, like the malevolent entities, aren't trying to take over.
So, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys amongst the NHI?
Yeah. I'll start with bad. Draconians, lizard people. A lot of people joke about lizards, and basically all politicians are the lizards type thing. But yeah, Draconians. So a lot of them are built or named after a lot of constellations. So Arcturians are the good guys. I work with them a lot during some of my healing sessions, and well, I should say they work with me, and let me know that they're here. They visit to try to make Earth a better place, and they know our human lives are kind of slow compared to some of what they could do, but they're here to help and to guide. Um, I don't. Do you want to do? How deep did you want to go?
Well, I'm fascinated. I mean, one of the things that I've actually had people say to me, and I've got no evidence of this, and I'm just fascinated by it, is that there is a reptilian presence on this planet, and it's fascinating hearing you say that. Are you able to tell me? Did you see any evidence of beings in your work at the UAP Task Force?
UAP Task Force, no. So that when I was on the task force, official duty on the task force, we kept it strictly to data. We did not talk about aliens at all. We didn't discuss conspiracy theories. We kept it strictly to data
But
because we were
would
working on imagery from what I was doing.
forgive me for interrupting, but if, say, somebody had secured video of a biologic or an alien, wouldn't that be data?
It would be. I never saw that. I wish I would have. That would have been cool. But no, I only looked at aircraft.
And so when you say that you didn't come across it during your time at the UAPTF, where have you become aware of the presence of what you say are reptilian beings?
Oh, that was through my spiritual side, my spiritual work.
And do you
I have, uh
and forgive me, sorry, I apologize for interrupting. When you talk about that, is that something that you volunteered to your colleagues at the UAPTF? Because I'm fascinated by
Yeah.
the number of people in defence and intelligence who say to me privately that there is something to this non human intelligence idea of different beings, blue beings, reptilians, Nordics, greys. And it does my head in because they're talking candidly about this as a reality and accepting it in quite a normal, casual way. And yet, to my worldview, we're the only intelligent beings that I know of at the moment. Well, yours is derived from a spiritual understanding. Uh, uh, I'm intrigued because there's a lot of stories, a lot of legends, a lot of mythology and modern ufology suggesting that there have been interactions between humans and different types of non human intelligence. And have we? I mean, did you ever see any evidence in your time at the UAP Task Force, for example, that there were agreements between humans and non human intelligences?
I never encountered it, but I know of stories of people prior to me in prior programs that know of that.
And it's interesting because one of the people I know you worked with was Jay Stratton. And poor Jay and his family, as you know, have had extraordinary experiences since he returned from Skinwalker Ranch with anomalous phenomena hounding his family, often in quite an unpleasant way. Um, is this something that people on the UAP task force talked about? Did people often have these kind of anomalous experiences? Lou Elizondo, for example, told me in an interview how he and his wife and family saw orbs, often at night, but also during the daytime in the back garden, some kind of intelligently guided orb that floated through their house and through their back garden. How many members of the UAP task force had what appears to be NHI clearly taking an interest in them?
Um, I don't, I don't want to speak for other people because that's their story, and maybe they'll come out and talk. But there were a few of us that have had personal encounters, and some a little bit more intense than others. Mine was good, but I also am used to entities coming in my house and talking with me as a medium, but somebody, you, like you said earlier, you wouldn't be okay with that. So I have a different mindset from when I have a visitor versus them because I know what comes in my house is going to be of love and light because I put very strict boundaries and protection up. Um, but not everybody knows that, right? Or not everybody knows how to do that protection. I, yes, I'm trying to dance around answering your question. Yes, there's others that have had personal encounters at some point in their life, maybe not necessarily when they were on the task force.
One of the things that I've been researching very recently is people with psionic abilities that the US government, notably the US Air Force, has been taking a strong interest in. When your psychic abilities came to the attention of your managers in the Department of Defense, was there ever any attempt to recruit you into something like the Gateway program to study your psychic abilities?
Nope. No one. It was never a conversation or anything like that.
And when you were a child, some of the people that I've been talking to have gone through the gifted and talented education program in schools, and they found themselves diverted into programs that were run by a private military contractor, overseen, we suspect, by the US Air Force, which appears to have been looking for children with alleged psionic abilities. Did you ever in your time as a child have any kind of testing that made you wonder if you were being tested for your psychic
Oh
abilities?
no. I grew up in rural Missouri. If somebody would have tested me, the whole town would have known within 2.5 seconds. It was no, and then you would have known the strangers were in town and they talked to Sarah, and so no, I'm thankful that that didn't happen.
One of the things you've talked about in the course of this conversation is, we've talked about God, we've talked about how you died and you feel like you went to heaven. Are you Christian? And do you think that those beliefs, if you have them, mold your perception of what you saw?
Yes, I grew up in a religious household, and my spiritual journey has taken me down a different route, so I don't consider myself religious anymore. I'm definitely still a Christian. I pray to God and I talk to God, and I talk to a few extra people now than I did before. Um, I I think how my journey has happened has been at the I mean, there's a synchronicity to everything, right? And I think it synchronized perfectly, because if I would have done any of those orders in a different manner, I might have a different perspective for things. But I think because of my astronomy and the astrophysics background, it's also really kept me open-minded for all of this. Because even in undergrad, when I was a sophomore, somebody asked me, are we alone? And I'm like, why would we be selfish enough to think an infinite amount of space? It's just us. And then the next question was, but you believe in God, so how do you portray infinite amount of space? And it was such a weird question to me because I'm like, why are those two separate things? Why are it was just it blew my mind that people put things in different buckets, and the world doesn't work like that.
It's interesting. A few months ago, we had a conversation with Paul Thigpen, who's quite a prominent theologian, and we were talking about the ideas behind UAPs. And Paul was arguing fundamentally that they're not incompatible with Christian beliefs or any religious beliefs. That if you look at religion, if I made the observation that if you go back through religion, it's possible to see a lot of religious ideas through the notion that in fact what we regard as spiritual beings are in fact perhaps highly intelligent, super advanced technologies that were engaging with humans at a time when, you know, what was perhaps a spacecraft powered by anti gravity drives was described as a winged chariot or a glowing sphere in the book of Ezekiel. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I do connect to angels very this is really hard for me to I'm not used to just, talking, I call it with muggles about this. So,
No, it's
um,
funny. I mean,
I
it's funny. I have a daughter who's very similar to you in terms of your belief system, and she's constantly jolting my worldview and basically challenging me to be more open minded.
yeah,
And one of the things that I find is the more I go down this rabbit hole and infuriate the debunkers, I love it. I get these rabid messages from debunkers who are attacking me for taking seriously things like psychic abilities, things like near death experiences, and yet so many people are describing what you're describing. I mean, they can't all be deluded and wrong, can they?
right. I think the truth is coming out. It's happening in the spiritual community. You call it an awakening, and everybody, 100% of humans that are born, we can all do what I do when I talk to loved ones. We just lose the ability over time because we're
Why?
told it's not real. We're told it's an imaginary friend, or don't say that. That's against God, and so we get it in our heads that it's not right and to not talk about it. But if you embrace it, it's actually brought me closer to God. It's brought because I could see it's hard to explain because I get to see different things that others don't from a different perspective as well. So your physics is about reference points. If you are solving an equation, your reference point matters because if you change that, you're going to get a different answer. You're going to get a different outcome. And I get to see multiple reference points at one time and multiple outcomes. And it's such a gift that I hope to never take advantage of, but I also get to see, the bad as well that comes along with this. And people are always going to believe what they want, and that's fine. I'm not here to force somebody to believe everything that I'm saying, but I'm saying it with confidence, or else I wouldn't be here. I'm not getting paid. I'm not, nobody's sitting on the other side of this laptop telling me what to say. I'm doing it to try to help, and try to educate. So the biggest thing is education and help the awakening. And kids now are starting to be embrace more of the unknown, and it is such a marvelous thing to witness.
So I'm fascinated that you say that you were in contact or you actually saw this blue being, because one of the things that has really jolted my worldview, and you and I spoke about this privately, is that multiple people, an alarming number of people, have contacted me from all over the world since I started talking about a person who told me that they were being communicated with by a blue being. And I'm somewhat embarrassed and ashamed of myself to admit that initially I was scoffing at the idea and very, very dismissive that a non human intelligence would reach out to an individual human and impinge on their consciousness and give them creative ideas or intellectual ideas. But that's exactly what people are describing to me is going on, that there is some kind of seeding happening, some kind of exchange of knowledge happening at the consciousness level. And it often involves beings or entities that, when you really push people, I mean, it shocked me when you said earlier that the being you saw in your bedroom was blue, because that just brought back the familiar tones. All of the accounts that you give are so familiar to me. Is there a mission that you believe you've been imbued with? Have you been conveyed the notion that you have an obligation to make people more aware?
Um, I don't think it's an obligation because we still have free will. I think um, it's time to wake more people up.
But is that something? Is
When
that is that something that you've decided yourself, or do you think you've been given a little nudge?
oh, I for sure have had a nudge. I've been having a nudge my whole life.
Yeah.
All of this roller coaster of a journey has made sense, and the more spiritual classes I take or the certifications I get, it's just another layer of, this is why I'm here. This is why God kicked me out of heaven.
And
Different things that I've been able to do at work, of projects that I've worked on, and it's like, okay, this is also why I was kicked out of heaven. So I've definitely got a nudge, and I definitely am brave enough. I was raised to be a very strong, independent woman and can do a lot on my own, and take a lot of blows. And I have my whole life I've spoken up for others as a group, as a whole. People have passed me words to speak for them. And I think now is just another layer of that.
can I ask you this in closing? I think we're getting close to having to wrap soon, but I'm so enjoying this conversation. One of the excuses that's often given to me privately by people of deep religious belief and deep religious conviction is that America, particularly, is a very religious place, that most people believe in God. And the idea of an ontological shock, that revealing the existence of a non human intelligence would be of such a shock to the populace that it would cause widespread breakdown of society and a loss of the very structures of our democracy. What do you say to that kind of notion?
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I think that's why maybe some things haven't happened in mass yet, because of it would cripple economy, it would cripple religion around the world, not just our country. It would hinder, gas, like if they gave us their technology, we don't need fossil fuels anymore. It would impact every single thing in our lives. And uh, I'm excited for the day. I'm hopeful for the day if they want to show up, but I think they will do it in a baby step type manner. I hope they do.
Do you think
Yeah.
we're ready?
Um, will anyone ever be ready? I think that answer is probably no. So I know there's a lot out there that are. I have been receiving messages and a lot of emails and stuff from people that have had encounters. There's a lot of people out there that definitely are that there would be a lot of support of. So yeah, I overall yes, we're ready, but
My analysis could never be scientific because I'm only as good as the people that contact me. But going on the people that contact me and the volume of people engaging with this subject, I get the impression that the phenomenon is showing itself far more overtly to people at the moment, that there is a very intense effort by whatever it is to make people aware of its existence. Do you think we're close to some kind of a disclosure moment? If not, I mean, I certainly doubt the Pentagon's ever going to stand up at a lectern and tell all, but do you think the NHI might be positioning themselves at some stage to reveal to us the manner
oh,
of their existence?
absolutely. I 100% confidence, yes. I do think NHI are ready to come forward. I think all of these, like what you said, things are happening more frequently now, and I do think disclosure is going to happen from the public, not from the government. The disclosure is going to happen, and the government's going to have to backtrack and yeah, be open. Like, oh yeah, how about that?
So why are they lying? Why not just tell the truth?
Um, my personal Sarah opinion, this isn't anybody else's. I just think that, at first they didn't know how to tell the public and so buried it and that mound of dirt that it was buried under has now become a mountain and maybe you don't know how to come back from that. And also maybe things were forgotten over the years and people have passed away that had some legacy knowledge, so that went with them because they never were able to write it down because it was classified. And so I think it was a multitude of things. But again, my personal opinion.
So, Sarah, how can people contact you if they want to hear more from you and know more about your work?
I am on Instagram, so Sarah Grace Warrior. And then, yeah, I think that you could Google my website. That's on there too. So email is sarahgracewarrior@gmail.com. If you want to reach out there on LinkedIn, I have had an influx of LinkedIn things. So I'm sorry, I don't get on there very much. But yeah, I think mostly Instagram is probably the best way to message or email.
Well, I, for one, take great heart from the fact that the Pentagon, which is commonly described and decried as this kind of monolith of denialism and cover up, actually has somebody as open-minded and as spiritually interesting as you on their staff, and it makes me feel better for the sake of humanity that you're in there with all the secrets in your head. Sarah Gamm,
Thank you.
thank you so much for speaking to Reality Check.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. Well, this week we have a guest I've been wanting to get on for years. He's one of the giants of UAP UFO research, Robert Hastings, the man who exposed the connection between the nukes that we have, nuclear weapons, nuclear facilities, nuclear power plants, and UAPs. And today he's going to explain how he came to the conclusion there's a link. But before I bring him in, I want to paint you a word picture. Imagine a 16, 17-year-old boy sweeping the floors at the air traffic control tower at Malmstrom Air Force Base in 1967. That was young Robert Hastings. And he worked there because his dad worked as a US Air Force officer on the base. And in the course of one evening, he was summoned across to a radar screen by a friendly air traffic controller who pointed him to various targets on his screen. They were anomalous objects doing extraordinary things. And from that moment on, Robert Hastings was hooked. And thankfully, that was the case because Robert has provided us with probably one of the most invaluable pieces of research into the UAP phenomenon. It's his work that has cracked an area wide open, validated with corroborated US Air Force and other military documents, a secret that the US Air Force has been at pains to try to conceal for 60 or 70 years, the indubitable link between UFOs and nuclear weapons. Robert Hastings, welcome to Reality Check, sir. I am delighted to announce that we have a sponsor on Reality Check, and that sponsor is none other than a martial arts god that when I was a little boy, I worshipped intensely. I had his posters on my wall, and he inspired me to learn karate and other martial arts as a young teenager. I'm talking about Chuck Norris. When I was a little boy, there was one movie that I went to watch about 5 times in 1972 called The Way of the Dragon. And it was Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris facing off against each other in the Colosseum in Rome. It was just mighty stuff. And would you believe Chuck Norris is now 84 years old? And while I have broken hands and knees and ankles because of my foolish interest in karate, whacking boards in a dojo late into the night, Chuck Norris's body defies explanation. The man is 84 years old, and yet he's still got the vigor of a man 30 or 40 years younger than him. He's still kicking butt and working out. And what's amazing is he's stronger, he can work out longer, and has plenty of energy left over for his grandkids. He did this, he tells us, by making one change. And he says he still feels like he's in his 50s. His wife's even done the same thing as well, and she's never felt better. She says she feels 10 years younger. Her body looks leaner, and she has energy all day. And Chuck's made a special video that explains everything. And make sure you help us and Chuck by watching it. If you go to chuckdefense.com/Ross and click in the link below in this video, it'll change the way you think about your health. Now, once again, that's chuckdefense.com/Ross. Click on the link in the description below to watch the video. You won't believe how simple it is. Just a reminder, the legendary Chuck Norris is a whopping 84 years old, and yet he's got more energy than me. And his body may be broken, but for some reason, he seems to be able to keep on going. I want to know his secret. I'm going to click on that link. What he's discovered that he could effect dramatic changes to his health simply focusing on 3 things that sabotage our body as we age. Watch his method by clicking on the link in the box below, chuckdefense.com/Ross. Robert Hastings, welcome to Reality Check, sir. Did you ever find out what those objects were on that radar screen that you saw as a teenage boy when you saw them being tracked on the Malmstrom Air Force Base screens?
The FAA controller who pointed them out to me on his screen, a man named Bob Grasser, simply said these were unknown targets. I was walking by emptying his trash can in a place called RAPCON, Radar Approach Control. And we had previous conversations about radar. He knew me. He knew I was interested in radar. And for whatever reason, he just kind of nonchalantly said, we're tracking unknown targets, or whatever words he used. And I recall after this many years getting very excited and peppering him with questions. And I think he kind of did a double take and realized I was drawing attention to us from the other controllers in the room. And he kind of backed off and said, why don't you come back later and clean up? Well, I cleaned the rest of the tower, about 2 hours worth of work. And when I returned to RAPCON, he clearly did not want to talk about it. I worked every other day, and 2 days later, I caught him in the break room, and I said, "Were you tracking UFOs the other night?" And again, he clearly did not want to talk about it. However, my father, who, by the way, was a senior master sergeant, not an officer, worked at the NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command radar facility on base called the SAGE building, part of a international network with Canada, US and Canada. He worked right in the military radar building. And I went home that night and was very excited. And he said, I think the radar, tracking of UFOs went on tonight. I'm not sure. Unbeknownst to me, he made inquiries at work, and a few days later, he confirmed that NORAD's facility did track the objects, and that the rumor going around was that they were maneuvering near nuclear missile sites. These were bona fide UFOs. So that kicked everything off for me. You're correct.
So obviously, there was a connection that was alerted to you at that early stage. That's 57 years ago, Robert. 57 years ago, you got twigged to the fact that there's clearly a connection between UFOs, these weird objects in our skies, and nuclear weapons. And it ended up with this magnificent book that I recommend to everybody I speak to, UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapons Sites, which is your definitive explanation of all of the 167 plus witnesses that I understand you've interviewed who had direct knowledge of these incursions. Can I ask you this? Is there any nuclear site that you're aware of in the United States that hasn't had a UFO incursion?
I can't say that literally every nuclear weapons related facility in the US has been visited by UFOs. I can tell you that all the major nuclear missile bases, both the ones that were operational in the 60s and the 70s and the ones that are currently operational, have been visited repeatedly year after year, according to the sources that I've interviewed, yes.
So, as I understand it, you became aware much later on as you started doing your research. Give me an idea of what you found out about Malmstrom Air Force Base in the course of your research, which of course was the base where you'd grown up as a young teenage boy.
Well, I was a teenager, as you said, and I couldn't really do much with this incredible information until I became older. I went to college, got married, and in the summer of 1973, I happened to be researching various subjects in the library and stumbled upon some UFO books and magazines and discovered that J. Allen Hynek, who was Project Blue Book's civilian scientific consultant for many years, had a year previous to my experience at Malmstrom, had written an article in the Saturday Evening Post magazine, the December issue, in which he said that UFOs were flying over nuclear missiles at another base, Minot in North Dakota. That just took me aback. I went, holy cow, that's what I think went on at Malmstrom, and apparently that's going on in various places. So that prompted me really to start seeking out informally, very sporadically, military veterans who might have knowledge of these cases. And by the late 70s, I had about 25 witnesses who were in various positions in the Air Force, but were personally aware of UFO incursions at nuclear weapons sites, missile sites primarily. And I was so intrigued by this and felt that it was such an important subject that the public should be made aware of the secret. And I quit my job, went out on the college lecture circuit, almost starved to death, but began a career of speaking at public venues, U.S. colleges and universities about this topic.
Can I tell you, Robert, the thing I want people to know is how reverently you are held by the people in the know, not just people that I know on the inside who are aware of the connection between UAPs and nukes and who tell me constantly that there is clearly some interest by whatever these NHI are in nuclear weapons facilities. But also people like Lou Elizondo, Hal Puthoff, all of these people who've spoken out about the issue. They speak with absolutely huge respect for the work that you've done. And the thing I notice is, as far as I can see, you've never been debunked. You've never been savaged by the splenetic debunkers. Nobody can lay a glove on you, because the thing I admire about your work is you've been able to find first-hand, direct witnesses to some of these incidents, many of these incidents, and moreover, you've been able to corroborate them with US Air Force military records. Take me through how you did that, and take me through the kind of corroboration that you found yourself discovering.
Um, the number of veterans that I encountered over time increased significantly after I went out on the lecture circuit in September of '81. I discovered that most of my lectures, there were members of the military in the audience, some of whom came up to me afterwards and said, "I know what you're talking about. I was at such and such a base, and this is what happened." Some of them, I asked each and every one of them whether we could discuss this later and, get a formal interview from them. Some said yes, some said no. And over time, one by one, veterans came to me, or I sought them out because I had heard through the grapevine that someone might know something. And one by one, I learned that this activity had gone on. So I can't tell you why I've been so obsessed by it, but I figured if I was going to do this, I should do it as well as possible. I tried to take a journalistic approach. I vetted these witnesses. I got what was called their DD 214 records, which confirmed the positions they held in the Air Force and at what bases during what time frames. Those kinds of documents wouldn't have any reference to a UFO encounter they might have witnessed, but it did confirm that they were who they said they were in the military. And so just one thing led to another, and it's so dramatic. I really retired from all of this in 2012 due to advancing age and some significant health issues I have. But I'm sure it's still going on today. And if there are persons in the military, ex-military, I should say, who are watching this who want to contact me, Ross can provide my contact information. And I'm still interested in learning as much as I can about this.
So let's talk about specifics, Robert. I mean, let's talk about, say, the Minot case in Dakota. Talk me through what happened, what you discovered happened.
At any given base, there were many, many instances over the years, which is why my book is 500 pages long. At Minot, the most dramatic incident, and perhaps at any base, as a matter of fact, was a conversation I had with a man named David Schur, Schur, who was a Minuteman nuclear missile launch officer in the 1960s at that base. And what he told me in 2007, and again, I have audio tape uh, record of all the conversations I've done with these gentlemen. What he said was one night in 1966 or perhaps 67, his guards up at ground level, he was underground, of course, in the launch control capsule. His guards at ground level called down to the capsule and suddenly reported an object moving from missile to missile. And it clearly was a self-illuminated object. It was moving in an erratic manner that no aircraft could match. And it was clearly something significant. Almost immediately, according to Captain Shore, he told me that the launch activation lights on his console lit up. In other words, as this object hovered over a given missile, that missile suddenly went into launch countdown, which of course is terrifying. I mean, had it gone to its conclusion, it could have been World War III. And so one by one, he thinks it was 7 or 8 missiles. He had to flip what's called an inhibit switch to, in effect, neutralize this launch countdown. What he heard over a secure communication system that linked all the capsules together. There were, I think, 15 launch control capsules at the base, controlling 150 missiles total. What he was hearing is this object moved between his group of 10 missiles to the next group, to the next group, to the next group. And over the space of about an hour, virtually every group of missiles, called a flight of 10 missiles, was visited by this object. Shore could not remember in 2007 whether other men were reporting, other launch officers were reporting that their missiles had been activated, but he knew his were. And when he went to the base the next day, it was the end of his shift, and he was preparing to be debriefed. He and his commander, the squadron commander, said to them, "Nothing happened, nothing to discuss. Go home." Now, what Shore suspects is that other crews had arrived at the base earlier than he and his commander, and they were debriefed rather. And so people on the base already knew what had occurred. They didn't need to hear it again and again from various crews that arrived back at the base. But obviously, tremendously important incident.
That's what I don't understand, though, Robert. Why on earth? I mean, accepting that it's embarrassing for the Air Force and accepting that it shows that something was able to compromise the most secure coding and protection systems to stop these missiles from being activated. But why on earth would the Air Force want to suppress the fact that something was able to so easily activate their missiles? I mean, why? I mean, why hide something like that?
I think in the first instance, you really wouldn't want to let your adversary, in this case, the Soviet Union, know that we were having trouble with our missiles being knocked offline or even activated. As you know from another case at Malmstrom in '67, Bob Salas, a former launch officer, said that his missiles were knocked offline. They weren't activated. They suddenly were dysfunctional. You certainly, in the first instance, would not want your adversary to know that your first, strategic line of defense or offense was not operational. More importantly, I think the government just basically has decided for decades now that the public, not only Americans, but the world, is not ready for the big secret that these things are from somewhere else. They're not humans who are flying these craft. And so this is just another example of something that had to be hidden to keep the overall cover up intact.
That's the really interesting part about your story. I knew because I interviewed, as you know, Robert Salas very early on in my cadetship into UAPology. And Robert basically woke me up to the fact that there were missiles that had been um, deactivated, like they were basically not able to, if they'd wanted to launch, they wouldn't have been able to launch. And that to me was, if you like, a demonstration by whatever these objects were that they could meddle with the systems. But I didn't realize until very recently, when I read your account of Mr. Schur, that in fact there had been what had also happened in the Soviet Union, a demonstration of an activation of a missile. Now, just explain to the lay observers watching this, Robert, how careful the encryption and coding and security systems are on missiles to stop them from being launched. The fact of activation of missiles, the fact that in the Sure case at Minot, you had a situation where even though the president hadn't issued a launch order, there'd been no turning of the keys, something had been able to do this.
I'm not an expert as far as all the technical procedures involved with the missile systems. I know what my sources have told me, how things work in a general sense. But I do know that, and Bob Salas has explained this a number of times, in each launch control facility, which controlled 10 missiles, each missile was independently segregated from the others in terms of electronics. And for something to take down 10 missiles all at once was just not simply feasible or possible based on their knowledge of the system. And yet it did occur. By the way, it's based on the time frame of the incident I witnessed at the air traffic control tower. It's conceivable that I witnessed Bob Salas's event. It occurred that spring in March of '67, and it occurred in the evening. I worked from roughly 7 to 10 p.m., and so I may have indeed witnessed what he was experiencing out at the missile site. Let me also point out that I think whoever's flying these craft are demonstrating first that they're interested in the fact that we have nuclear weapons and that we've threatened to use them, for 50, 60 years now. And I think that's of concern to them, maybe for altruistic reasons, maybe for selfish reasons. If they have plans and projects here on Earth, if they're involved in some way on this planet, a massive nuclear conflict would affect their projects and plans just as much as human civilization would be impacted. When, in the case of David Shor's experience, when the missiles were actually temporarily activated, my opinion is that they weren't, they and the UFOs were not attempting to start World War III. I think they were simply demonstrating, hey, we're in control of your weapons, whether you like it or not. Here's what we can do. And they probably knew, in fact, that David Shore and the other officers could shut down the launch. And so they weren't really generating, they weren't trying to start World War III. We know that you alluded briefly to an incident in 1982 in the Soviet Union, which journalist George Knapp has brought to our attention. He smuggled hundreds of documents out of Russia in 1994, some of which dealt with nuclear weapons related cases in the Soviet Union. And in October of 82 in Soviet Ukraine, there was actually an incident very similar to what David Shur described to me, where suddenly several missiles, unspecified number of missiles, went into activation, were preparing to launch. And for 15 seconds, it appeared World War III was going to start. And we now know from interviews that have taken place in the last 10 years in Russia that some of the men who were on site when that occurred, they were just utterly terrified. They thought it was World War III. They had no idea what was occurring. So again, in my view, my humble opinion is that these entities, they're not human, are just simply trying to demonstrate, you're playing with fire, you stupid humans. You better think twice about all of this.
I was told once by a friend of Edgar Mitchell that he took the view that it was the non-human intelligences saying the kiddies are playing with matches. We need to stop them from doing this foolhardy thing.
Right.
Have you ever seen in any of your research from any of the witnesses, has there ever been any indication of any kind of malevolence or bad intention from the phenomenon that you've witnessed tampering or incurring on these sites?
Not that I'm aware of. I'm aware of things that I've read, both prior to the internet and now on the internet, stories of what seem to be nefarious activity on the part of these entities. But those seem to be few and far between, as far as I can tell. And, who knows who they are and what they're up to and what their intentions are. But, on the whole, I'm sure the people at the Pentagon aren't happy about these situations, but I view it as an encouraging development that somebody is, demonstrating they can control our weapons and the Russians' weapons, and hopefully that's for a good purpose.
So, one of the things that you have been able to do, Robert, is obtain on Freedom of Information requests information that in military documents confirms some of these incidents that you've been told about. Can I take you to a few of those? I mean, for example, in August of 1966, there's a document, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. There was a report of a round disc object traveling back and forth and up and down, verified from 100,000 feet to 4,000 feet, climbed out of sight, duration 3.5 hours. Incredibly detailed report. Take me through that if you can recall that one, or if you want to cite any other of these cases, take me through any of these FOIs that you've been able to obtain.
Well, first of all, I need to say that I made efforts beginning in the early 1980s to access documents through the Freedom of Information Act. In particular, my sources said that they had been debriefed by OSI, Air Force Office of Special Investigations agents, and that's probably where the interrogatories existed, the records of the debriefings and so on. I repeatedly tried in the early 80s to get documents from OSI and got the door slammed in my face each and every time. So I actually have not been successful in accessing documents myself, but fortunately other people have. Barry Greenwood, who is a very respected researcher and document analyst, he's acquired God knows how many documents, and some of which refer to the nuclear weapons cases. The late Todd Zeckel, who actually launched a lawsuit against the CIA in '77, I think, accessed documents through the FOIA. And the one that I think is most telling that I used to present in my lecture program was from Mansman Air Force Base in November of '75. There were, I think it was over a 3 night period, there were multiple incursions of disc-shaped craft, and some were described as cigar-shaped, flying around Malmstrom's nuclear missile sites. At one point, the document indicates that jet fighters were launched to attempt to intercept these objects, whereupon the UFOs left the vicinity. They waited for the jets to leave and go back to base, and then they came back and began hovering around the missiles again. They clearly, are playing cat and mouse with the jets. So I think that's a pretty good example of the kinds of incidents that I've been investigating.
So, Robert, what, if any, official military or intelligence or government comment has ever been made about the allegations you make of a nexus between UFOs and nukes?
Um, it's more of an informal kind of surveillance of my own activities, rather than I'm unaware of any formal announcement where anyone at the Pentagon has gotten on a podium and said, no, they're not messing with our nuclear weapons. That's all wrong. They don't want to touch the subject, so they're ignoring it. But I began speaking at schools, colleges, and universities in September of '81. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes veterans attended my lectures. I subsequently arranged telephone interviews with them. In February of '82, when I got off the road after several weeks of my first efforts at lecturing about all of this, I began calling, I think it was probably 6 or 7 Air Force veterans who had said they'd be willing to talk with me, and with their permission would record the conversations over the phone. They told me various things at various bases during various time frames. I would thank them for speaking with me and say something like, someday I'm probably going to write a book and I'll put your interview in the book. Everyone said fine. I hung up the phone after each call, and within a minute or two, I would get another call. Nobody saying anything into the phone, just breathing heavily and then hanging up. And that happened after each and every one of these calls to the veterans. So I went, okay, I'm on someone's radar. Someone's keeping an eye on me all of a sudden. And frankly, it frightened me for a while. I didn't know what might occur next. Would I be physically assaulted? Would I be, attacked in a legal way? I just was the FBI going to show up at my door? I had no idea. I knew I was, skirting the law in the effect in the sense that these were still classified incidents. As far as the Pentagon was concerned, me publicizing these gentlemen's testimony was breaking the law, was exposing classified information. So I got that. I knew that. And I just felt that the public's right to know was more important than that principle. And so I finally just decided after several weeks either I was going to do this or I wasn't. And I decided I was. And so it's been decades of efforts to find the facts.
So, aside from that obvious harassment, was there ever any more overt threat made to you by anyone in authority to try to discourage you from doing what you were doing, investigating the phenomenon over these nuclear weapon sites?
No one ever did show up at my door. Another researcher whose name I'm spacing at the moment gave him permission to try to find whether any agency had files on me. He did get a confirmation from the FBI. I've got the letter that they did check their index. They found that they had records on me. They claimed that when they went to search for those records, they were missing, which I don't believe for a second. As far as the CIA and the NSA, the National Security Agency, the letters I got from them said basically we can neither confirm or deny, nor deny. So, I'm sure they're watching me. I'm sure that they haven't lost sight of whatever I'm up to. We could spend a lot of time talking about the telephone and email issues that I've had even within the past week. So someone's keeping an eye on me. It is what it is.
You went on to make a brilliant documentary, UFOs and Nukes, The Secret Link Revealed. What was the key part in that film that you enjoyed telling the most? Was it the Malmstrom or Minot incidents? What were the events that you really enjoyed revealing most of all?
Well, let me say that over a several decade period, I was approached by 21 different documentary film companies who wanted to do a documentary with me. And either because of their track record, I knew what some of their previous work was, or the fact that they weren't prepared to allow me to have editorial control, that is what's called script approval. I declined to be involved with any of them. So in 2014, I believe, a very good friend and wealthy benefactor named Jared Tarbell graciously provided the money for me to create my own documentary. I did the best I could. I'm not a filmmaker, but it's gotten good reviews. And what I've tried to do is just systematically go year after year and describe some of the cases that I was aware of. Um, to your point, the most important case, I think, one of the most important cases, is called the Big Sur incident. There's a man named Dr. Bob Jacobs. In 1964, he was stationed at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, and he was the head of a photographic team. They had a telescopic camera they photographed missile launches through. And one day in September of 64, they were just filming this rocket launch, this missile launch. And when they got back to base, Dr. Jacobs was called into a man named Florenz Mansman, Major Florenz Mansman's office, and a projector was set up, and there were two guys in gray suits sitting in the room, not saying much. And the major said, "Lieutenant Jacobs, watch this." And Jacobs was stunned to see that when the dummy nuclear warhead separated from the missile shortly thereafter, a bright point of light came in out of nowhere and circled the warhead and flashed four different beams of light at it before racing away. Whereupon the warhead began tumbling and fell into the Pacific Ocean, hundreds of miles short of its target. Now, Major Mansman rather, told Jacobs, this never happened. Don't ever mention this again. Bob Jacobs kept his silence until the early 80s. He finally wrote an article in a magazine about it, and at which point he began getting death threats over the telephone. They actually even blew up his rural mailbox at one point as they were talking to him over the phone. So he and his wife were threatened with death after he went public with this story about a UFO shooting down a nuclear warhead. Backing up, at the time, Major Mansman, it was not known for 20 years, but Major Mansman has admitted in writing that he did a frame by frame analysis of the film using a magnifier. And this little point of light on the film that circled the warhead was actually a disc shaped object with a dome. And he could see enough detail that before each flash of light, the four beams of light occurred, this object pivoted on its vertical axis, fired the beam, and pivoted back. So he could see a wealth of detail, not only about its shape, but its actions. And, how can you not think that that's amazing? I mean, you've got not only UFOs hovering above our missiles in the ground in their silos, you've actually got them pacing in near space and at least on one occasion shooting a warhead down to demonstrate their abilities. Let me just briefly add that in the last 6 months or so, Lou Elizondo, I heard through the grapevine, had seen this film while he was with ATIP, and Lou Elizondo has now publicly confirmed that he did indeed see the Big Sur film, and that it showed exactly what Bob Jacobs said it showed.
Now, that's a very important point, Robert, because, of course, the film that you're talking about has never been publicly released. It's always been withheld from the public. And there's always been some question mark about whether or not it still existed. So to be very, very clear, you're saying that Lou Elizondo, and I've watched the same interview, and Lou does seem to indicate this, he's suggesting that he's actually seen the Big Sur film where a dummy inert nuclear missile warhead is knocked out by a UFO.
Actually, Lou had read my book while he was with at ATIP. Hal Puthoff, the scientist for the group, presented a copy of my book to Lou. He apparently learned about Big Sur by reading my book and subsequently attempted to get the film. And he's now on the record as saying he was provided with the film. It did show what Bob Jacobs said it showed. Now, I think it was in March of 23. This information was conveyed to Sean Kirkpatrick of AARO, and Sean allegedly looked for the film and claimed that he couldn't find it. And Lou's response to that, between you and me and the rest of the world, was bullshit. And so, that's where we are. That's the last I've heard about this particular episode.
Can I ask you this, Robert, while we're here? Do you think that AARO, the Pentagon's UFO UAP investigation office, is an organisation that under Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick was credibly investigating, objectively investigating the UAP issue for the public?
No, I don't. I think it was a front organization for probably CIA or someone like that. I don't think there was any serious effort or intention to seriously investigate the UFO phenomenon. I think Kirkpatrick was a shill. I'm afraid that anyone who's going to be a successor in that organization really has his hands tied, whatever his personal belief and wishes may be. I have enough contacts. I have a few contacts, former and retired high level intelligence community and DoD, Defense Department personnel, who said, the powers that be, the people that have kept the secrecy for decades, they have not changed their stance. They're digging in their heels. They're very upset by Lou Elizondo and David Grush and probably me and people like me who are trying to get the facts out. And, they're saying to me, don't expect AARO to do anything groundbreaking or earth shattering in terms of revealing anything substantive.
So let's come back to the Big Sur incident for a moment. You made the point, but I want to reinforce this with our audience because to me, it was one of the most persuasive things when I did my interview with Dr. Bob Jacobs. Obviously, you had Bob's testimony as a witness saying that this is what happened. He was with Florence Mansman, his commanding officer, and in the presence of these two spooks, presumably from Air Force Office of Special Investigations or something like that. And he was told to shut up about it. And really, at the time, it was his word against the national security establishments that this actually happened. But just to reinforce the point that you were making, and this was a kicker for me in writing my book, Mansman, years later, when Bob Jacobs was being savaged by debunkers and was being accused of making this whole story up about the Big Sur missile being knocked out by a UFO, Mansman showed enormous courage and corroborated what Dr. Bob Jacobs said, didn't he?
He did. I've got probably 10 private letters written between Jacobs and Mansman and a couple of other researchers that were communicating with them, in which Mansman says repeatedly that what Bob has said is 100% accurate. Again, this was decades before Lou Elizondo confirmed it. He did, by the way, at one point in several of these letters, identify those persons in the office back in '64 as CIA officers, and that they had shown that showed him their identification, confirming they were CIA. So I find it interesting, among other things, that the people who confiscated the film after the screening in the office, the film was confiscated and flown back east, quote unquote, according to Major Mansman. I find it interesting that it was not released to an Air Force group, but was released to CIA. And they do seem to be running the show. Multiple sources over the years have said publicly, researchers and sources who have a background in the intelligence community, that the group that's been running the show since the early 50s is indeed the Central Intelligence Agency.
So on its face, I mean, just that one incident at Big Sur, you've got Bob Jacobs looking through a telescope or shooting through a telescope, and then later on he sees the film that shows categorically, corroborated by Commander Mansman, image of a craft of some kind, a disc of some kind, shooting some kind of light that essentially knocked out this missile. I mean, it's quite extraordinary that there's been no simple effort by the government to respond to that. I mean, if there was nothing to this, you would think that they would make a statement and categorically deny it.
Again, I think that the strategy has been just don't touch it. You do not confirm or deny it. Even if at some point, when I think it has to happen eventually, some president, and hopefully in conjunction with world leaders, are going to let the citizens of the world, all us humans, in on the secret that this is in fact non-human intelligence. They've been here for a long, long time. But I'm quite sure that they're not going to be talking about these entities shutting down or activating our nuclear weapons for some time, even after that announcement is made. You really don't want to start out by talking about that kind of dramatic, development. So it could be many, many more years before the confirmation of this nuclear weapons related activity it comes to the fore.
You focused a lot of your work, obviously, on nuclear weapons sites, but as I understand it, the history of this phenomenon goes right back to even places where nuclear weapons were being built. But also, there's a lot of sightings that are on the MUFON database, I've noticed, of nuclear power sites where the craft or whatever they are appear to be taking an interest in nuclear power stations. Have you done any research or work into any of those other areas, like, for example, the places where nuclear bombs are built or where power stations are operating?
I, in terms of the civilian power plants, no, I have not. I'm aware of the cases that have been reported publicly, but I have not investigated those. I sort of had my hands full with whatever other professional activities I had going on, and so I just focused on the military cases over the years. But the first incident that I'm aware of really was before even the atomic bombings of Japan. A man named Bud Clem, who was a former Navy fighter pilot during World War II. His squadron was stationed in Washington State at a place called Naval Air Station Pasco, which was right across the river from the Hanford plutonium production facility. That site created the plutonium not only for the Trinity site blast in New Mexico in July of 45, but also the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki. The Hiroshima bomb was a uranium based bomb. Bud Clem told me in 2009 that on three separate occasions, a self illuminated bright object hovered right over the Hanford plant. And his squadron sent up a fighter, a Hellcat prop fighter, World War II fighter, to chase the thing, at which point the object moved away at a high rate of speed, leaving the plane in the dust. That occurred on three occasions to Bud Clem. Now, a researcher named Jan Aldrich subsequently found documents from the Fourth Army that were declassified, I believe, at the National Archives. And indeed, it confirmed there were three unknown aerial objects that had hovered over the Hanford plant in January of 45. So you've got a pilot's testimony and documents confirming radar tracking of these objects. That was a good 7 months, I think, before 7 or 8 months before the bombs were dropped on Japan. So whoever these guys are, they were well aware that we were creating nuclear weapons even before they were detonated in later in 45.
So you've implied to me, Robert, or expressly stated in the earlier part of this interview, that you think that these are some kind of non-human intelligence. Why do you rule out the possibility that it could be a foreign adversary?
I think, first of all, that the incidents that are being described to me occurred in the 40s. I mean, and they're describing craft that are silent, that are capable of flying thousands of miles per hour, stopping instantaneously, and things that no country on earth had in 1945 or the late 40s. So I think we were clearly dealing with an outside party, and who knows? Are these from another dimension of reality? Are these from somewhere else in the universe? And they've figured out how to travel between their star system and ours easily to come here repeatedly. Who knows what the bottom line answers are? But I think non-human intelligence is probably the best way to describe what they are. Um,
Let me give you the classic debunker rejoinder there, which is why on earth, if there is, and we all accept, according to the Fermi paradox, there must be intelligent life out there. But why would intelligent life be bothered with us primitive apes? Why would they, chug vast distances, light years across the universe to come to this speck of dirt and harass us about our nuclear weapons?
I take the argument back to forward, backwards to forwards, and let's start with the fact that this is going on, and we've got credible sources saying it's going on, so it's occurring. So we have to find an explanation for it. So rather than theoretically saying, if I were an alien, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that, just let's look at the available data. The data are somebody's here. They have technology that are orders of magnitude beyond what we have. They've been visiting our nuclear sites since the late 40s. You can, I think, infer that something is going on that's beyond the human scope or the human abilities. human ability set. So that would be my response to that. I think, self-evidently, if these stories about recovered alien bodies and craft that David Grush, for example, have described before Congress last year, if those are borne out, then there you go. You've got the evidence. But until something like that is, available in the public domain, and there's no doubt any longer, I think all of us, all we can do is provide our best assessment of the available data. And that's mine.
Where do you stand, Rob, on? I mean, I know Lou Elizondo, for example, often talks about the national security threat or the flight safety threat posed by these objects. And some people often have a swipe at me, actually, for reinforcing that and basically saying that by definition, anything that's breaking into national security airspace and hovering over nuclear weapons facilities is by definition a threat. That's not to fearmonger, it's purely and simply a threat until we know what it is. Where do you stand on that? What's your view on the idea that this is some kind of national security threat?
I understand that's Lou's position. I've spoken with him a number of times. I was fortunate to have him all to myself for 2 days in 2018 to ask him every question under the sun. Um, I know given his background, given his responsibilities, he has to be cautious. He has to assume the worst. People who, for example, like Jim Semivan, who I'm in touch with, former high level CIA officer, his position is we have to be concerned about what they're up to because it could be nefarious. And I get that. And you would want them to have that position. It's just my hope and my belief that it's not dire, it's not threatening to our species. If the Pentagon is using our best efforts to duplicate the technology, in private, if we do indeed have crash craft, if they don't want it come out made public that this is the case, that we have alien visitors, so to speak, then in my view, that's not a good enough reason to keep the rest of humanity in the dark forever and ever. We need to know the facts. But I understand Lou's position on that.
It's not just an American phenomenon either. I mean, that's the other debunkle splenetic rant, which is, why is this happening, just over America? It only ever seems to happen in America. What's your rejoinder to that?
Anyone who's familiar with sighting reports, they're worldwide, they're global. So certainly it's not an American issue. I you know, I think it's skewed depending on the country you're in. You probably hear more about your own country. I don't know that much about what's occurred in Australia, except the well-known cases that have been reported over the years. So you probably have a much better handle on that than I do. So it is global. Anyone who takes the time to look at the available data before drawing conclusions will know that it's not just an American issue.
So let's talk about the other side of your experiences, Robert, because not only are you a dogged researcher and investigator, you are also an experiencer. And you and Dr. Bob Jacobs only revealed very, very recently in 2019 in a book called Confession, Our Hidden Alien Encounters Revealed. You revealed that both you and Bob were both experiences. Tell me about that.
Hitherto, I mean, everything we've discussed to this point, I've tried to put in terms of nuts and bolts data, reports by military personnel. That was my whole modus operandi, just to get as many of those guys on the record as possible. And so, again, I went on the lecture circuit in 81. In 1988, I was involved in a camping trip with several other people. Long story short, what occurred during that trip led me to believe beyond any question that, in fact, I had been abducted by non-human entities. Now, the circumstances were such that I went, can this really be happening? I never expected this. It's going to greatly complicate the fact that I'm trying to tell lecture audiences all over America that this is a very nuts and bolt problem. The military is up to their ears with this, and they're trying to keep it from the public. If I suddenly from the podium tell people that I've been abducted by aliens, what's that going to do with my credibility? Alien abduction is just a subject that's too far, a bridge too far for many people. Nevertheless, from 1988 through the 90s into the early 2000s, I had multiple experiences that I have concluded were indeed abduction experiences. And because I did want to maximize the usefulness that I might have convincing people about a nuclear weapons link with UFOs, I chose to keep that secret. It was a strategic decision on my part. In 2017, I was diagnosed with a serious heart condition. It's affected my ability to do the things that I've been wanting to do for the last few years. But at around the same time, Bob Jacobs, who I had ongoing contact with, said, neither of us are getting any younger. If we're going to be true to ourselves and not be hypocritical, we really should tell other humans the rest of the story. And so we just bit the bullet and wrote that book and laid out as best as possible what we know has occurred to us. Now, my attitude is take it or leave it on the abduction phenomenon. I get it if some people just can't grapple with that. If it hadn't happened to me, I perhaps would be more dubious myself, but I really can't explain away the things that have happened to me repeatedly, which it's just too complex a subject to go into here.
I would like to at least get into some of the detail of what you mean when you say abduction. Can you describe to me a typical event that you've endured?
One of the most dramatic, I was in a hotel room in Pittsburgh. This would have been early 1995. I had already had a number of encounters that I had some conscious memories of, and later got additional memories through hypnotic recall, which is a controversial subject in itself, but I did have conscious memory of certain other experiences. So by early 95, I was already aware that something was going on that was quite real, quite alarming, something that I couldn't control. So I was in this hotel room in Pittsburgh near the airport, and suddenly the room was dark. I was awakened at night, suddenly out of sleep. And I got in my mind what clearly was a message, a telepathic message that said, "We are here for you. You've met us before." And if one hasn't had one of those experiences, it's really hard to explain how it feels or what it seems like. But when it happens, it's quite clear that it's real. It's not your imagination. And no sooner had that happen, I uttered out loud, "Oh, they're here." I was scared. I was terrified. And no sooner had I uttered those words, I levitated off the bed. My body was airborne and I was heading up to the ceiling. I was wide awake. I was not dreaming. I was not hallucinating. I was not having sleep paralysis. I was in the air heading up toward the ceiling. And after perhaps 5 or 6 seconds, I blacked out, apparently, because what seemed like the next instant, the room was flooded with daylight. I was laying back on the bed, and several hours had passed. Now, when I laid there and tried to gather my wits and go, oh my God, even with all the other things that had happened to me, I never levitated, literally levitated. So I was trying to grapple with all of that. I finally got up and went outside. Well, first of all, I went to the bathroom, turned on the light switch, no electricity. The power had been killed in the hotel. There was no power. They had a power failure. I finally went outside, and there was a fire engine in the parking lot with a fireman leaning against it, smoking a cigarette. And I said, "Is there a fire in the hotel?" And he was waving a cigarette around and saying, "No, it's real puzzling. This hotel," he pointed to mine. He said, "the one next to it had a power failure overnight." And then he turned and said, "All those restaurants on the other side of the street are on the same grid, and they're just fine. So we're trying to figure out why these two hotels lost power." Well, if anyone's reviewed a number of UFO sightings and incidents in the literature, power failures are something that's a signature with many cases where people are seeing an object and the power goes dead. So I'm pretty sure I know why the power went off in my hotel. Um, again, I can't prove any of this, but it happened.
Why? Why would a non-human intelligence want to abduct Bob Hastings?
Uh, That's something I've asked myself countless times. I don't have the answer to. I should add that of the 167 military witnesses that I've interviewed over the decades, 7 of them have had abduction experiences that I'm aware of. And in fact, this past June, I invited them to my house here in Colorado, and we were basically comparing notes and just trying to make sense of all of this. What happened to you? What do you think it is? And so on. But none of us have any answers. But um, based on our conscious recollections, in some cases hypnotically enhanced or retrieved explanations or memories, they do seem to be genuine physical face-to-face encounters with non-human entities. The question I have asked myself, not what is it and why is it happening, because I don't think there's any answer to that, is this fact, the fact that this has been part of my life, and I haven't mentioned that apparently it happened to me at least once as a child. There is some evidence that I had an experience as a child. Is what I've done in terms of my research, in terms of trying to get to the bottom of the military cases. Is that something I'm doing subconsciously because of this other aspect in my life, or is there a prosaic reason for it? Is there an outside influence? In fact, I've considered, is somebody influencing me to do what I'm doing? I have no answers to that. It may be totally off the wall to think that, but the questions go through your mind when these things have happened again and again. Let me briefly say that in December of 2014, I awoke in my home here in Colorado and found a short entity standing at the foot of my bed. I was awake, I was not dreaming, and I was about to scream. And before I could do that, what seemed like the next instant, it was bright sunshine flooding through the windows, and several hours had obviously passed. Now, that's been almost 10 years, and nothing has happened to me for the last 10 years, knock wood. So, it is what it is. I don't know most of what it's about, but I know it's physically real and it is occurring.
Now, I know Bob Jacobs, when I spoke to him about this, he told me he had woken up after these events with marks on his body. And I recall one photograph he sent me of it almost looks like a tattoo on his body, on his skin, of little
Right.
dots, about 8 or 9 dots in a square shape. Have you ever had that kind of experience after
I,
you've?
I have looked again and again. If it's anything like that on my body after any of these experiences, it's very subtle. I haven't noticed anything. I have found blood on my pillow on at least 2 occasions that I can recall, and could not find any evidence of a cut on my face or insect bite or anything that would have been the source of the blood. So I have had that on 2 occasions. Let me briefly add, as I mentioned in the book, Bob and I mentioned, I forget the year, I think it was 2018, I found blood for the second time on the sheet right under my chin. And again, it was clearly a spot of blood. And I texted Bob real quickly, and he went and checked his bed, and he had found, I forget the time difference, but he had found blood on his pillow virtually at the same time that I found blood on mine, which I find pretty interesting.
Tell me about the triple digit thingy, Bob.
Um, this sounds very strange, but it's enough experiencers have reported it. It's a real phenomenon. Um, After my first abduction in 1988, as an adult at least, I began having nightmares about what seemed to be the abduction itself. On each occasion, when I woke up bathed in sweat and scared to death, it was 4:44 according to my digital clock, and that happened more than once. And I learned by reading the literature that other experiencers, in particular a man named Ray Fowler, who's a leading researcher, he's actually the first person that talked about UFOs shutting down nuclear missiles. He worked for a company, Sylvania, in the 60s. That was one of the Minuteman contractors. He had contacts at Malmstrom. He learned that these objects were hovering over the missiles and the missiles were going haywire. Ray Fowler, I think in probably the early 70s, went public and said, I'm an abductee. And he started describing all of the experiences he had had. And what he said and has repeatedly said is after his nightmares about alien abduction, he wakes up at these triple digit times 333, 444, 555. And I now know from my communications with other abductees around the world, many, many people are experiencing this. What it is, why it occurs, we don't know. But I have a chapter in Bob in my book called The Triple Digit Thingy, in which we describe the phenomenon. Is it a hint? Is it a tease? Is it just sort of, secret handshake? Somebody's telling you, these experiences are real, and we're going to kind of hint that they are. We don't know. No one knows, I don't think, but it's real.
Have you ever, in the period when you've been engaging with these NHI, in these weird abduction encounters, have you ever tried to communicate with them?
Um, just speaking for myself, my memories of the actual encounters are so fragmentary. I have no memories of that. What I have memories of, again, both consciously recalled and sometimes under hypnosis, is they're in control. They're not telling me anything. They're just moving me around and doing things to me. But unlike some people who are very responsive to the hypnotic recall technique, who can remember a very sequential kind of narrative, this happened, then that happened, and then that happened. I don't have that, fortunately or unfortunately. And I just have these glimpses of basically being manhandled, and they're in control. I'm not. The entities that I see in all of my experiences are, in fact, what we are commonly calling grays, about 4 feet tall, large, bald cranium, big black eyes. And I do have these on more than one occasion what seems to be genuine telepathic communication. They don't speak with their lips.
Do you feel any sense of malevolence from them?
I get a sense of business-like activity. They've got something to do. They're going to do it. Your wishes or desires or fears aren't of concern to them. They're just doing what they're there to do and to get it done. That's kind of a very cold uh, sense that I get from them. Yeah.
I can imagine that during these encounters, you're terrified. Are you?
Yes, quite clearly. And again, when I'm hypnotically regressed, I'm just utterly terrified. My entire body is quaking with fear. And when I have conscious recall, the last experience that I described in 2014, where I sat up off my pillow, lifted my head off my pillow, and saw this entity standing at the foot of my bed. I was about to scream. I was just terrified because I knew something was going to happen. So yeah, the overwhelming, almost the only sense is just utter fear and terror.
Now let's sit back for a moment and accept. Okay, let's just accept, even though it's a big ask. I mean, obviously the debunkers would say this is all hallucination, it's all hypnotic suggestion. But let's say we accept that you have encountered an entity in your bedroom, that you have been abducted by non-human intelligences. Why not be more overt? What can you speculate about what their possible game plan might be for doing such a thing?
Um, you know, I just don't know that I have any special insight, even though I'm subject to these encounters. Um, I've read what everyone talks about online, and in books, various opinions and theories about what they're up to. I have a good friend named Steve Aspin, who's a Brit. He's a lifelong abductee. In fact, he's a fourth generation abductee. He's written an excellent book called Out of Time, which I highly recommend, in which he talks about his experiences. He believes, as do other people who've researched this subject, that these reports of a hybrid program whereby these entities are actually retrieving sperm and ova from humans and using it in some way that involves genetic, I wouldn't say experimentation, but some sort of genetic program that is combining our DNA with their DNA. He believes that's what's going on. I've read reports about that, of course. I have in all of my experiences, I have no explicit memory of sperm being taken, for example. So whether they've done that to me or not, I have no memory of it. So I think that's probably a leading, candidate for trying to explain what might be going on with the abduction experiences. I would also say, getting back to the government cover up, if in fact some government decides to go public with this and tell the world that this is real, that we have visitors from elsewhere, you're not going to be hearing about the abduction experiences from a government source for any time in the near future. Like the nuclear weapons cases, that's something you're just not going to talk about right away, if ever. Um, how do you break it to your citizens that these entities have the ability to come into your home and take you out and take you somewhere and do things to you against your will? That's not something that any government is going to voluntarily admit to people.
So, Bob, in the spring of 2023, you actually showed some initiative and brought several US Air Force veterans to AARO, to the Pentagon's UFO investigation office, to give their testimony. And these were people that you'd interviewed over the years about their UFO encounters in Air Force ICBM fields operated in various parts of America. What happened?
Um, he's given me permission to identify him now. A man named Kirk McConnell, who was an investigator for the Senate Armed Services Committee, approached me in January of 23 and said, I've been in touch with AARO. People at AARO, I believe he said Sean Kirkpatrick in particular, is asking me to ask you whether you would approach the veterans that you're still in touch with to see whether any of them would be willing to talk to AARO. So I sent out a group email, and I think I got ultimately 11 confirmations from people, including Bob Salas and some other people. And they set up appointments. They spoke with AARO, somebody from AARO. And at the time, they were all very positive about their experience. They were treated cordially. They were basically allowed to tell their story without interruption or without a lot of contradictory pushback. And so, for the first time, having had these experiences decades ago out in the missile field, to be able to present that information, openly to a representative of the U.S. military, the gentlemen that they spoke with were military. I'm not going to identify them. But they were members of AARO, and they felt it was a good thing, and they said so to me in emails. However, I think it was in April of 2023 when Sean Kirkpatrick went before Senator Gillibrand, had a committee hearing about AARO, and said unequivocally that no information presented to AARO up to that point indicated any evidence of an extraterrestrial involvement. All of my sources became very angry and indignant and said, we're talking about things going on in the 60s and 70s involving craft that don't even exist today in our arsenal or the Russians' arsenal. Clearly, they had to be from somewhere else, some other entities. And so they felt betrayed. They felt as if they had been used, and they're uniformly angry about their experiences with AARO. So I actually told them in the group email initially, I said, look, I think you need to do this. I think you need to talk to AARO. However, my opinion is that it is a front organization. They're not serious about investigating. They're probably a front for CIA or somebody like that. And don't be surprised, if nothing comes from this. But I could be wrong, guys, and miracles sometimes happen. So I think you really need to speak to AARO. And I think it was 11 of them did ultimately. But once all that happened, they felt uniformly betrayed. A couple of them mentioned to me they learned that the interviews with the AARO representative weren't even being recorded. And if you're going to have a serious investigation and take witness testimony, you need to record what's being said. And AARO wasn't even taking it seriously enough to even record their testimony.
Robert Hastings, you've spent nearly 60 years of your life intrigued with and investigating the UAP mystery. Are we going to take another 60 plus years before we get an answer as to what it is?
I hope not. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow. I think it's just a question of time before it will happen, meaning an official announcement of the reality of all of this. But I don't think it's going to happen, in the next few months. Um, Whistleblowers are coming forward and talking about some dramatic things. And so who knows, the dam may break suddenly, but I'm cautiously optimistic it won't be another 60 years. It's not going to even be another 5 years, I don't think. I think not only Americans and Australians, but people all over the world are going to know the facts in the relatively near term.
Well, Robert, I hope you and I live to see that day. Robert, if people want to get in touch with you, if there's a whistleblower with some dark secret about a nuclear missile facility and UFOs they'd like to pass on to you, or to me, by the way, how do they get in touch with you?
I'll just give them my email address, which is ufohastings@aol.com. And if anyone approaches me claiming to be a military veteran and having had an experience involving UFOs, the first thing I'm going to ask that person is to provide their DD 214 to confirm that they were indeed at the base and in the squadron they said they were. And if they're willing to do that, either tell me something off the record or hopefully something for publication. I'm very eager to hear from those persons.
And just to repeat too, I really do strongly recommend this wonderful tome, UFOs and Nukes, Extraordinary Encounters at Nuclear Weapon Sites, which is Robert's definitive book on this subject. He's also done the documentary, UFOs and Nukes, The Secret Link Revealed, and the book Encounters that we talked about is entitled Confession, Our Hidden Alien Encounters Revealed, and it's co-authored by both Robert and Dr. Bob Jacobs. Robert Hastings, it's been an honour, sir. I could talk to you all day, but I can see both of us are going to flag if we keep on going much longer. Thank you so much for speaking to me today.
Thank you, Ross. You've been very supportive of my work over the years. I greatly appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.